Ríordáin, and you have 8 minutes.
Again, I want to welcome the Minister to the Seanad, and I have an awful lot to say on this issue. Just in terms of the strategy itself, Minister, it would be remiss of me not to mention there's two individual NGOs, one of whom who has welcomed the strategy, and I think that's important to say, not always to focus on the NGOs who have difficulties with it, but the Immigrant Council of Ireland are welcoming the strategy. However, the Migrant Rights Centre of Ireland have effectively rejected the strategy on the basis that it doesn't have enough time-sensitive elements to it and needs to be an awful lot more concrete in what it's trying to achieve. I share an awful lot of what other senators have said in relation to integration and immigration issues. I think we are at a scary time, notwithstanding what's been said about Trump and what's been said about Brexit, which is effectively an immigration debate. I amn't necessarily as positive as Senator Lawless is about moves across Europe in terms of the recent elections. You basically had 1/3 of the French electorate voting for a fascist, a racist. You had 49% of the Austrian public almost electing a neo-Nazi as president. I've mentioned Brexit already. Now, in fairness to this country, we've never had a mainstream political party having immigration as a platform at a general election time. There's been minor parties, small parties, very little support at election time. So no major mainstream party has ever listed on its priority list in terms of its election manifesto anything about immigration, curbing immigration, or any xenophobic platform. And I think we need to be thankful for that, and we need to recognise that, but we not need in any way to be complacent about that, because notwithstanding what's been said, I'm a bit taken aback by congratulatory statements about political reaction to what happened in Ballahadreen. I remember different things being said by political representatives in Ballahadreen before the people made their decision as to how they felt about individuals coming into their villages. I remember political representatives from that area being a little bit less than welcoming. But it was actually the people, the local shopkeepers, the community in that part of the world who welcomed the Syrian refugees into their arms. And then it was the political system who began chasing after the people. So I found that quite discouraging and then very encouraging when it came to the reaction of the people in that area. I want to speak to direct provision. Now, there was no issue that people in this House have raised more often when I was in your position, Minister, and no issue which I worked harder on myself. Now, I would love to be the person to stand here and say, let's end direct provision. I would love to be that person. But we have to, when we're dealing with this situation, work beyond slogans and things that fit neatly into hashtags and into the reality of the situation. We have a report. We have a report that was basically a compromise between a number of NGOs who feel passionately about this area and the department. Now, I remember it being launched, Minister. I was there, and I said we have to implement this report. This is July 2015, and the Minister of the day, who is still the Minister for Justice, said it was something to be considered. It was food for thought. Now, the NGOs who signed off on that report did so with massive risks to their own reputation, because these are people who are trying very hard to improve a system, and they thought in good faith that the department officials who signed off on that report were going to implement the thing letter by letter, word by word. It wasn't a discussion document because they compromised on things they didn't want to compromise on. They compromised on issues over work. They compromised over oversight. They compromised over length of stay and issues in that regard. And when it was signed off upon, they felt that they could stand over it if it was implemented to the letter. And it hasn't been. We're 2 years on. Now, I will say this much, because the arrangements that were done, and this is classic Department of Justice behaviour. Classic Department of Justice behaviour, because the phrase that they always come back to is pull factor, pull factor, pull factor. My God, if we show some humanity, we might get pull factor in this country. There might be more of them. There might be more of them. What will we do then? This issue should have been resolved years ago, before we had a housing crisis, before we had an increased number of asylum applications to this country, before we agreed to take 4,000 Syrian programme refugees. Now, Minister, in fairness, and I have the stats here from your last speech, in 2015, at the publication of that report, there were 2,695 people in direct provision over 3 years. Now there's 1,200. So basically there's 1,500 people less in the system than there was 2 years ago over 3 years, long-stay residents. So that's to be congratulated. However, how is an NGO going to trust the Department of Justice ever more to go and try and compromise with the Department over an issue if this report isn't implemented? And I'll say it to you again, I've said it to you before, and I know you've heard me say this, and I'm blue in the face saying it to you. The draft programme for government had in it a commitment to implement the McMahon report. When the actual programme for government came out, that sentence was deleted. I don't know who deleted it. It wasn't you. You weren't the Minister for State at that time, but somebody did, and I bet you it was the department. Because I know they have a history of being pretty miserable and pretty unsympathetic when it comes to this entire area. I don't know if we can end direct provision, because I don't want to put 4,500 people on the housing list. I don't want to be responsible for hearing stories of vulnerable families now being homeless and living in parks under trees, because that were the reports that happened in 2000. So I'm not going to go with hashtags, I'm not going to go with slogans, but for God's sake, can we not just implement the report? To the letter. To the letter. Now, other issue has been raised in terms of undocumented migrants. And it is absolutely to our shame, and to the credit of people like Senator Billy Lawless, who's been working for years in America to get the undocumented Irish regularised, that we, as an entire political system, land in the White House, brass neck, to go to the Americans and ask them to regularise the Irish. And we have 26,000 undocumented workers here in Ireland, and we're not doing the same for them. I mean, how do we have the gumption or the credibility to ask anybody in that white supremacist, racist regime to do something for the Irish? But we won't do it here. We won't do it here. 26,000 workers, 26,000 individuals. I think it's 20,000 workers and about 6,000 children. Now, those are the issues I think we need to recognise. There is immense goodwill in this country for people from overseas. It comes down to the very essence of who we are of a migrant people. We understand the Syrian situation because we are the people who travel in coffin ships. We understand people, dehumanising people because of their religious beliefs, because that's exactly what the Irish went through in America and in Britain. We understand, the signs that said no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. We understand that stuff instinctively, and that's why I believe no political party will ever go down this line. But it will be not to the credit of your department, Minister, if this nonsense with the 26,000 undocumented workers is still going regularised, and if this report isn't implemented to the letter. And I will say this much, because I don't think, genuinely, the Department of Justice is fit to deal with this issue. Because when you have all the issues of Garda reform, and you have the prison service, and you have the vast bulk of legislation that goes through these two houses, and you have all the equality issues, and then, on top of that, integration and immigration and refugee and asylum issues, I just don't think the Department of Justice is capable of dealing with this sensitive humanitarian issue and needs to be put into a separate department. So, look, I welcome the strategy, notwithstanding the fact that the migrant rights centres have serious issues with it. I absolutely fundamentally believe that we are absolute political hypocrites if we end up in the White House again talking about undocumented workers in the States without doing something here. And I will join with others. I'm not asking you to end direct provision, but the least we could do, for God's sake, is to implement the report that we commissioned in conjunction with the NGOs 2 years ago.
Thank you, Senator.